Hello and welcome to episode 413 of the Thinking LSAT podcast. I'm Nathan Fox. With me is Chris Murphy. Ben is at the lake this week. I'm one of the founders of LSATdemon.com alongside Ben Olson. Chris has been teaching with us now for what? Chris, you've been around for over a year, right?
Not quite. I think I'm coming up on a
Really?
year pretty soon. Maybe September, I think will be my 1 year.
Okay, so coming up on a year teaching for the Demon and have recently stepped into more of a leadership role with us at the Demon, helping us to manage teachers and brainstorm class ideas. You've come up with some very creative ideas inside the Demon. Maybe you could talk about a couple of your classes a little bit just to give people a flavor of what kind of stuff you've been doing at LSAT Demon.
Yeah, so I've got some of my regular classes. The newest one that I'm excited about is called the Final Passage. It's our
Okay.
advanced RC class. We had a student request for a couple more advanced classes. We saw there was a gap for RC, we plugged that in. Students have been loving it. They put the work in. Sometimes they sweat in the class, but it's really good. And then I also like to do a lot of fun classes, one-offs. Last year we had a holiday party at LSAT Demon, where I worked hard to find any and all LSAT LR questions that mentioned anything to do with the holidays, winter, cookies, buying gifts, all of that. We threw it together and it was a lot of fun. So the main point is any cool ideas you have as a student, send them my way. I'd love to make it happen.
Yeah, generally, we love hearing ideas from all of our students. Chris mentioned that we have had some requests for some more advanced level classes, so we have added those in LSAT Demon Live recently. We've got, I believe we have advanced classes now for LR, for games, for reading comprehension, and basically whatever our students ask us for, we add more of those. If you like what you hear today from Chris, we have a free event coming up Wednesday, August 9th. That is at, what time is that? 3 p.m. Pacific? Chris has his cursor there in my Google Doc, so I can't actually read the number, which is strange. 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. Yeah. Pretest pump up with Chris. Talk a little bit about that, Chris.
Yeah, so this is going to be the most fun class you go to at LSAT Demon. It is like a mixture of some of our teachers popping in, giving advice, sharing success, but also just pumping you up, recognizing the cool work that you've done so far at LSAT Demon, telling you that if you signed up for the test and you followed our advice, you are ready. You're going to know the score range you're going to score within. But
Yeah.
also knowing that such an important part of this test experience, if you've signed up, you've mastered the skills already. It's also just managing your stress and anxiety, finding ways to keep your brain spaced in the way it needs to be. And so we want students to leave that class feeling like, okay, they can do this.
Cool. A good opportunity to meet not just LSAT Demon teachers, but also continuing LSAT Demon students. We are opening it up to everybody in the world, though. Just go to lsat.link/free, make a free account for LSAT Demon, and you can come sit in on that pump up class with Chris. Talk to our students. Ask our current students what they think of the Demon, and then decide whether you want to study with us. That's a good opportunity to do that. Okay, we're going to dive into our first email. We've got an email here from Anonymous. The subject of the email is online JD. Why don't you read, Chris, this email?
Sure. It says, Nate, previously you said that online should be the future of law school. Isn't that to the detriment of making connections, which are vital to legal careers? What other tips and advice could you give both to an online student earning? What tips and advice could you both give to an online student earning a JD?
Okay, so first of all, I just don't think it's to the detriment of making connections at all. I know people have had some bad experiences learning in Zoom, but I have had nothing but excellent experiences teaching in Zoom. And I got to tell you that I feel like in Zoom, there are more connections, there are more opportunities to connect with your fellow students, not less. We have a chat that is open and is popping in every class I ever teach. We've got multiple different conversations going on in the chat all at once. And there's opportunities for private conversations, which we don't even see, but I'm sure, and I hear it all the time, that people are connecting to other students and creating their own study groups. This is something that we actively encourage. Sometimes in classes, we'll do small group breakouts to try to encourage people to talk to each other. But we start asking, we'll ask serious questions in a poll. We'll ask fun questions in a poll. We ask students to raise their hand and we call on them and they speak out in their classes. Many of our classes are highly participatory. Mine tend to be a little bit less participatory in terms of like, I I want to hear your questions. I don't really want to hear the students' answers as much as I want to hear the students' questions. But there's lots of formats for students to talk. And when they talk, if you participate, how do you participate? Well, turn on your camera if you can. In law school, they're probably going to mandate that you turn on your camera. We don't do that at LSAT Demon, but turn on your camera, ask questions. If the teacher asks you for, hey, what do you think about this? Go ahead and chime in, participate in the polls. If you see somebody saying cool things in the chat, you give them a +1 or you laugh at their little joke or whatever, and then your people are making connections. I just don't see any reason why the live campus is required in order to make connections. There's almost like weird. I feel like in Zoom, in a lot of ways, you get more face-to-face contact than you do in a live classroom, right? We don't like go around staring in each other's faces. In an elevator, everybody faces forward and nobody says anything and nobody looks at each other. On Zoom, we're all just kind of here, aren't we? We're looking at each other and we're talking to each other. I don't see any reason why you can't connect online. I don't know. What do you think, Chris?
I agree. And I was going to say, I think the bar for giving a good impression on Zoom is so much lower than in person because you go into most Zoom experiences, you see people not talking, not asking questions, half the room has cameras off. And for us, we work in Zoom every single day. We remember the students that have cameras on, that are nodding, that are raising hands, that are participating, and we also see them improve even faster. And so just for some context here, I'm prepping to go to my first year law school at WashU St. Louis. So I'm getting all the incoming law student invites and things like that. I've had the opportunity to go to some in-person events, network, but also they've sent me a whole slate of online Zoom events, like meeting with judges all across the country, one a day, every single week over lunch.
Wow.
These are like opportunities that would be impossible if they tried to format them into an in-person form. I'd maybe have like a judge come by the campus once a month, and I'd hope I could drive and meet them or come out. Online, it's so easy. And so I think rather than thinking it's detrimental to connection, think about in this new environment, kind of in our new context and culture, what's it take to make good connections given the format we have and the vast opportunities it provides over just in-person experiences.
It's just so much more efficient. You mentioned score improvements, which ultimately for what we do, if we can also help you to connect to some of your fellow LSAT students, that's great. But our job at LSAT Demon, the thing that you're really paying for is you want your LSAT score to be improved. Well, the results are our results, Ben's results independently teaching for strategy prep in DC, my results independently teaching for Fox LSAT in San Francisco and Los Angeles. For years, our results were really good. That's how I was able to build a successful business. That's how Ben was able to build a successful business doing in-person classes. And we thought that we were the shit. We thought, nah, in-person is the way to go. We can't not teach in person. We have to preserve the live classroom experience. Well, then COVID came in and said, guess what? You can't do the live classroom experience for 2 years. We started LSAT Demon Live, where we started teaching live classes on Zoom. We never did it until we were forced into doing it. This is how strongly we resisted this idea. Once we started doing it, student achievement skyrocketed. It's just the scoreboard is just obvious. It used to be shocking to me when somebody would improve by more than 20 points. Now, when somebody improves by more than 20 points, I'm like, cool, you're on your way to 30. That's fantastic, but let's keep going. Okay, so why is student achievement so much better online? And I know that this is not the experience of, like, let's say you have a first grader, their student achievement is probably not better online. But adults who are about to go to law school, who are serious, it takes, I used to teach these classes in downtown San Francisco where people would commute to take a class from 6 to 9 p.m. and then commute home. even in that 6 to 9 p.m. class, I had to take breaks, right? I mean, every hour or so, we're taking a break for the bathroom. We're taking a break to get a coffee, a snack, or whatever. And so like the entire investment that the student is making is like, well, around 5 o'clock, I got to leave to make sure I can get to class, and leave class at 9. I'm going to get home at like 10 o'clock. So it's like this 5 hour investment for a 3 hour class that then doesn't even have 3 hours of content in it. Now I teach 2 hour classes on Zoom because it's easier to start and stop classes. It's easier to schedule things. Like I don't need to do long classes because people aren't commuting to my long class. So I just teach shorter classes more frequently. We have multiple live classes 7 days a week happening at lsatdemon.com. And it's just pure teaching. I don't take breaks. I don't need to take breaks. If you want to take a break, you turn your camera off. You put yourself on mute. You can grab your laptop and take this to the bathroom with you. I don't care. Like it's not, it's just so much more efficient time wise. And the chat, which I mentioned earlier, is actually the best part maybe of Zoom, at least in the LSAT context. The chat is incredibly useful. We're constantly sharing resources in the chat. So it's like, oh, you just got confused when I mentioned the difference between a sufficient assumption and a necessary assumption. Okay, cool. Here's a link in the chat that goes to all of our lessons about sufficient versus necessary assumption questions. And you can follow up with that during class if you want. Like maybe I'm rambling about something you don't want to hear about anymore. Oh, well, then go look at this lesson. Maybe you've already done some of the work that we're doing in class. Cool. Put us on mute. Go drill. Go do a couple questions during class. That's totally fine. Oh, you can't make it for the start of class? No problem. Show up late. It doesn't bother me at all. In the live classroom, you'd be climbing over people to get a seat and it'd be this big interruption. You got to leave early? No problem. You just like close the thing and you blink out of the room and you're gone and you go do whatever you've got to take care of. You're an adult. I don't need you to stay till the end of my class. I don't care. I want you to get the maximum out of it that you can get out of it. So I know the question was about networking, but the student achievement has been so much dramatically better. And that's why I really think that online is the future of law school. But I think there are many other reasons why online is going to be the future. And I really don't see why the making connections thing can't happen online. I mean, you got to face the reality of where we're going in the future here. I do not think that commercial real estate in downtown areas is likely to pick up. I think that is likely to continue to slide, forcing people to come back to work. Why? You can work from home. It's vastly more efficient. And I really don't think there's anything stopping you from making those kinds of connections. Sorry, I'm rambling.
And that's really the crux of it. I think when we think of whether this is like temporary COVID world or it's here to stay, it's absolutely here to stay. If you think about your law school experiences, them wanting to bring in a partner from a firm to talk to students, them wanting to bring in a federal judge, they could say, hey, do you want to hop on a plane, completely take off work, take 2 or 3 days, travel out here to talk to students? Or we have a fully immersed online experience, everything set up for you to just click a link, log in, talk to students, and then a minute later you're back to work. They're going to do that every single time. And so I think the way to think about it isn't like, oh my gosh, this is replacing it, it's inferior. Just think about how we can maximize these experiences that are going to be here to stay. And you absolutely can. And I think we've laid out reasons here. The chat is a huge piece of it. I used to teach in person as well, led a lot of workshops, large group things in person. The joy I have as a speaker that now when students have questions, they can just put it in chat. I can follow along. I can get to it when I want to. So much less distracting to me than like a hand shooting up in the air and sitting there. Really, when I don't have the time to answer it at that point, I can work those things in. And when I see a student ask a great question in chat and it sits there, I'm like, wow, what a good thought. What a great question. And other students are engaging with it. You're meeting them. That will happen in these law school environments too.
Oh, and it's an opportunity for enrichment for everyone, because if you put a question in the chat, maybe I see it in the moment, maybe I start responding to it right away. Great. That's a win, because I'm sure 10 other people had the same question. If I don't get to it, then it's an opportunity for the other students to chime in. And when, teaching is just the best way to learn. So if students jump in and try to answer that other student's question, then now everybody learns because, by the way, if those other students answer it in a way that I'm not fully happy with, I am going to jump in and try to correct that and just kind of redirect everybody. But think about it. Now you've got so many more brains in the room that are firing at once instead of just like me responding to one person's question or at me just going on with my lecture. It's like, no, not only do I want you to ask a question in the chat, I want you to ask 10 questions in the chat, and I want you to answer those questions in the chat. I want you to have a whole conversation, just this. Oh, and I want you to be talking to each other back in the background in the chat, which I don't even hear. I remember, I've told this story a million times, but I remember in San Francisco, these two ladies in the front, they were right in the front. They were like real good students, like trying really hard. But one girl is trying to help her friend understand one of these questions while I'm talking at the front of the room. And I can hear them, helping each other. But then it's also interrupting me. Well, the chat doesn't interrupt me at all. I just don't look at it if I don't want to look at it. The chat is like, yes, please continue to have all of these conversations in the chat. Whereas in a live room, it's like, no, we cannot have everybody. It needs to be one person talking at a time. And that is an opportunity to make connections, isn't it? Like student A asks a question, professor responds, there's some classroom discussion. Student B is like, sends a private message to student A saying, hey, that was a really cool question. Oh, and by the way, here's this one lesson that a link to a lesson that I think will be really helpful to you. Well, now those two people have had this opportunity to connect directly to each other. That in a live classroom, it'd be, they'd be across the room from each other and there's no way in hell they're going to be able to chat. So I get it with like, oh, but the serendipitous connections in the hallway, like, yeah. You're not going to be brushing shoulders with each other if we're doing this online. Instead, you're going to just be having like all of these brand new opportunities that you never would have possibly had in a live environment. And I think people miss that. They think about what's lost from doing it in a live environment instead of thinking about all of the many benefits of doing it in an online environment if you're doing it right. It sounds like WashU is already doing it right. That doesn't surprise me at all. WashU has always seemed to me as a kind of a up and coming, like a pretty innovative sort of a place. And yeah, they're in St. Louis. You're in what many East and West coasters can consider flyover country. But those judges, you've got probably judges in Washington, D.C. who are now showing up and talking to you at these events. Or judges in San Francisco or Los Angeles showing up because it costs nothing.
I'd agree. And, another case in point here, I think 2 years ago, WashU actually had Supreme Justice Tony Sotomayor stop by campus and give a speech, talk to students, interact in person, networking, right? I didn't hear of any WashU graduate then clerking for Sonia Sotomayor after that opportunity either, right? But with these online judges that come, the volume of touch points you have is so much increased. So anonymous, I would say, if we go into this thinking online, I'm not going to be able to network, it's a bad way to do it, that's probably what your experience might be. But if we look at this as an opportunity, seeing how can we use online networking to make connections, calling prosecutors, calling DAs, calling partners, saying, hey, I'm a law student. Would you have time for a 30-minute Zoom? Here's the link. Let me know when works for you. I'd be happy to meet. That's so much easier for them to say yes to than, hi, will you meet me for coffee somewhere? I'm a stranger, but I saw you work at this firm. Please give me time. The investment is so low for them that you're likely to get a return on it. And so start strategizing in this online world how we can make the most of it.
Yeah, maybe ask for a 10-minute Zoom instead of a 30-minute Zoom even, right? I mean, like it's easy to do these short meetings. And yeah, you just both blink into the room, you do what you got to do, and then you blink back out. And in 1 second, you're doing some other important task instead of like trying to find an Uber to get back to wherever and it's like spend 45 minutes getting to your next meeting. You spend 0.45 seconds getting to your next meeting with a alt tab. Yeah, I'll be shocked if it goes any other way. I know that lots of schools with expensive capital investments in big major cities are really trying to stay with this, oh, no, we need everybody to show up every day in downtown San Francisco. I don't think that that's where we're going in the future. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Not having had such a successful experience teaching in Zoom. And I know, because I know how successful Zoom education can be, I'm just sure that other people are going to pull it off. Might not be every school that pulls it off, but there are going to be many schools that are going to pull it off. And yeah, I see the rise of online JDs. I will be just beyond shocked if that doesn't end up happening.
I'd agree. Yeah.
All right, beautiful. How much of your stuff are you going to be required to go to all of your classes in your 1L year, or is there going to be some sort of an online option for you to go to lectures?
For me, it's all in person at WashU, at least in first year. After the first year, the curriculum opens up in lots of different ways. You can build in classes that are online, practicum classes, in-person classes, otherwhere. You can get curriculum experience for working online for like the prosecutor or working online for the DA, right? And so all of these experiences are being hybridized in so many different ways that it's just trying to figure out how you can incorporate it and what expectations and goals you're going to have for yourself when you're there. Your experience is going to be online to some degree, necessarily, whether it's student meetings with people in your class, whether it's meetings with professors, some portion of it is going to be online no matter what. So to already start planning the way to do it is going to be the way to success.
Well, there are many courtrooms which are just never going back to in person. You know, like judges are smart. They didn't get there by being dumb in most cases. And so the judges are like, oh, I learned how to do online court during COVID. And there's no point for any of the, like, it's just so wildly wasteful to try to get everybody into one room together, like one physical room together, if we can all just get into a virtual room together and do the exact same amount of business that needs to be done.
Same. I used to be a university judicial hearing officer. So you hear lots of different types of cases, often involving really tough conflict between students. As soon as we switched to online, we were like, oh my God, there's so much less pressure on students to show up with somebody that they've had a really bad history with to participate in the hearing than there is in person. We used to always have this huge hump of how do we make this environment comfortable, safe for everybody in this tough case. Didn't have to worry about that any longer. And they're never going back, ever.
Yeah. I went to some juvenile court proceedings for a volunteer thing that I did for a while back in LA. And for that, it would be like, okay, so first thing we have to do is we have to get dad, who is currently in jail. We got to get him to the courtroom. So he's now being dragged in, prison blues with armed guards. They have to like put him on a bus, drag him to the facility where we're doing these hearings. Now he's going to sit in a different cell all day for by the way, he's going to come into the courtroom for 8 minutes. The kids have to be taken out of school because it's a family matter. The kids need to be there. So we're going to get the kids and take them out of school probably for, again, the whole day. Like somebody needs to go in a bus or a van to go pick them up, bring them to this place. Now we have to have a place for the kid to sit all day to wait to go into court. We got, mom has to skip her job. Like, all so that everybody can sit around and buy shit out of the vending machine for 4 hours so that they can get called in to do their 8-minute hearing. And, just sensible people are going to decide, hey, we can set up video conferencing from the jail. We got dad taken care of. These kids can go into a separate classroom and jump on probably their laptop and just go and be there when we need them. Mom can step outside and do her thing for, on her lunch break instead of skipping the day of work. I don't know. It's just obviously better in so many different contexts. I'm not saying we're going to go 100% online and no one's ever going to leave their house anymore, but there are going to be lots and lots of legal contexts where we're just going to decide that, hey, this whole, I don't know, it's just all that effort is just not worth it. Let's do this in a more efficient manner. I think that's where we're going. Any tips for you? You mentioned earlier, like getting the most out of Zoom. Any more tips for students? If you are like, let's say some component of your legal education, or certainly for Demon students, what should students be thinking to get the most out of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the basics you hear all the time of have your camera on, right? Be participatory. And there's times when you're going to take a break, have your camera off. Not saying you have to be prisoner to your camera, but understand, because of what Nathan was talking about, the density of the experience, the speaker is looking at Zoom, students are looking at speaker back on Zoom. There's so much FaceTime. And so when people see positive FaceTime, that innately makes them think, okay, that person's listening. That's somebody I remember. I remember their names. They ask questions. I remember that as well. And so anytime we're in a networking environment, you've got to understand who you're talking to, look a little bit about their background, come prepped with a question. And, as you're sitting there, you're sitting in Zoom, you could be sitting there drafting a question in chat for 25, 30 minutes, really just typing it out, finding a good time, putting it in there. And so as much as you can make this an active process, a little bit of planning beforehand, recognizing how you're showing up in the room, you're going to have a good time. And so there's also the opportunities in these classrooms, as Nathan was talking about, to engage with other people there. So whether it's students, your cohort, your peers in law school, the speaker that's going to be there, whether it's DM chat, private chat. And then I always try to leave, if networking is a goal of mine, with some future connection point of, I went to your Zoom chat, this was awesome. See if I follow up with an email. See if there's another opportunity I can get. If there's another Zoom event I can attend, I can get details for, I can set up another meeting. These things, like any networking event, take strategy. And so when we imagine that serendipitous interaction in the hallway where I bump into somebody and that person's my boss in 8 months, that probably didn't happen either. I'm sure the people who get the most out of in-person
Yeah,
networking went in with a strategy. So go in with a
right.
strategy to
Like,
get something out of it.
where did the term elevator pitch even come from? Well, it's the idea that you should be prepared for these allegedly serendipitous interactions that you're going to have. It's not, because if you just run into that big shot in the elevator and you're not ready, you're not going to say shit. You're going to be in the elevator for 15 seconds. You're going to, oh my God, that's so and so. Oh, I really could. And then they're gone. And online, you can think of something, you can start drafting it. You can probably go ahead and send that follow-up email during the meeting. I mean, why not? Like, they're not going to check their email until after the meeting. And so you sent, like, right there, it's boom, there's a thoughtful question from somebody who was just, thank you so much. I was just at your event. It was really helpful. I'm wondering if blah, blah, blah. If you ask them a useful, interesting question, then next thing you know, you've got that interaction and you were already able to do it just from the Zoom meeting. Note about cameras. Cameras on is, I do think that you're probably going to be required to do that in law school. So you might as well get used to doing it in Zoom, whatever Zoom meetings you're doing now, including potentially LSAT Demon classes. I think you should just go ahead and have your camera on. Even if you never ask a question, just having your camera on is like, I'm getting nonverbal participation from you, and I know you're there, even if you don't ever out loud or in the chat, even if you never do anything. Just having your camera on is a way of being there and of connecting with your teacher and with your fellow students. But we have had students who have done an excellent job of participating who have never turned their camera on. I'm thinking of some recent students who totally killed it, who I never saw their faces once, but I knew who they were because those students, they would participate in the chat. They would interact with other students. I could see them like laughing at other students' jokes, things like that, which you can do with your camera off. What else? Oh, some of them would unmute themselves. So you feel uncomfortable with the camera for whatever reason. Maybe it's as simple as your laptop camera is broken. But if you're unable to participate on camera, you can participate with your voice. You can still use the raise hand feature. I can still call on you. You can still ask a question. And you can, of course, participate in the chat in many ways, even if you can't have your camera on. But I will tell you that the camera on, it's like the lazy way of participating almost, because, and it's a lot like sitting in the front row. If you have your camera on, you're sitting in the front row, I see your face. If you have your camera off, you're sitting in the far distant back row, and you still can participate from there, but you kind of got to go out of your way to participate from there. Whereas, everybody who has their camera on, you're all just sitting in the front row.
Yeah. And last thought for me, I want to brag about two of our students who are always camera off that absolutely made the most of their experiences. Raven and James shared in the Demon Discord this week that they had near 40-point improvements. I think James might have hit the 40-point mark. Raven, I think, improved 38 points from diagnostic to latest PT. Those were students that when they're in Zoom classes, they're participating. Camera on, camera off. I know them because of the questions they ask, the way they respond back to me when I ask questions. They're there. And you can see the payoff in that massive, mind-boggling improvement, almost 40 points on the LSAT.
Oh, yeah, which never, ever happened in the live classroom world. I mean, I never saw it happen once in 10, 15 years of teaching live classroom. Ben never saw it once in 10 or 15 years of teaching live classroom. And, it was like we had heard, like Ben had one 30-point improvement and I had one 30-point improvement, and we never stopped talking about those one, there was that one guy who improved by 30 points. Now we get emails all the time from Demon students who say that they improved by 30 points. And yeah, like you say, Chris, we've got Raven and James knocking on the door or already having walked through the door of a 40-point improvement, which is really very difficult because the scale is only a total of 60 points.
Yeah.
So yeah, 40 points is, just unbelievable. Okay. Anyway, ready for this next one? I'm going to let you read it. This is coming to us from the LSAT Demon Discord, which you mentioned earlier, Chris, and Abigail apparently found it for us. Go ahead and read it.
Sure thing. So this says, question for the Demon teachers / any peers that would like to give some insight. Currently a 2-passage person on RC. Either I score perfectly on the 2 passages I attempt or consistently in the 90+ accuracy range. When I read RC passages, I really do not worry about the time. Read carefully, take as long as it takes, accuracy over complete. That's my motto standard. And I feel that I live up to it in each passage I attack. However, even after feeling like I have a solid understanding of the passage, I tend to lose my swagger in the questions. I'll do a question, eliminate the wrong answer choices, select the right one, but be unable to move on to the next question. I'll frequently open up all the answer choices again. Eliminate wrong ones again. It's like an innate feeling in me that just wants to be sure I'm picking the right answer choice. At least that's how it feels. Nathan, what do you want to say already?
I think that students would be surprised if there was like hidden camera footage of me doing questions. I think students would be surprised at a couple things. One, you might be surprised at how long it takes me to read the passage itself. I'm really getting in there. I am not reading for speed. I am, as Anonymous here says, I'm reading carefully. I'm taking as long as it takes. I care about accuracy. I don't care about complete. I'm just not rushing through it. Okay. I'm like, here's the document that is going to control all of the questions. So I'm going to be the master of that document. That's not to say that I'm going to memorize it, but I am going to read it carefully enough that if you took it away from me, I could still probably answer most of the questions. There's a couple where I would be like, well, really wish I could have that document back. But for the majority of the questions, I would be able to talk intelligently about the question that's being asked, right? Like if it was open-ended, I would have an answer. What did the author think about XYZ? Well, I don't have to refer back to the passage to tell you what the author thought about XYZ. I go, and it normally starts with like just a rough thumbs up, thumbs down. It's like, well, the author basically liked that, or no, the author didn't like that. Why? Well, I probably have some reasons. The author thought that was a good idea because of ABC. The author thought that was a bad idea because of D, E, or F. I'm going to have some thoughts because I read the passage carefully and because I read the question carefully. So the calm with which I approach getting to the point where I'm going to start reading the answer choices, I think that's something that is different from what most, frantic novices do. Doesn't sound like Anonymous is doing that, which I'm glad to hear. The second thing that I think people are going to be surprised at if they're watching me on this hypothetical hidden camera that doesn't exist, if you're watching me do LSAT questions over my shoulder, I think you're going to be shocked at how quickly, or you're going to be shocked at how little respect I have for the answer choices. Okay. I'm reading A, expecting it to be wrong, and I'm going to be dismissing that answer as soon as it feels even a hair more wrong than the 80% wrong that I already presumed it to be. Where did I get that 80% number? Well, there's 5 answer choices. One of them is right. So 20% of answer choices are right. 80% of answer choices are wrong. The default mode needs to be A is probably wrong. Let me see why this is wrong. I'm going to dismiss it as soon as it gets even a little bit more wrong than I already thought it probably was by default. So again, it's wrong 80% of the time before I even read it. If I read the first few words of it and it doesn't sound like it's answering the question, goodbye. I am going to eliminate 4 wrong answers. I am going to spot the one correct answer. And then I'm just never going to do this thing that Anonymous is asking about, which is like, wait a second, I got to be sure. Let me open up all 5 of those answers. I mean, God, open up all 5 answers again, even when you have found one that you like and 4 that you dislike. That's just I don't know. It could be a little bit of imposter syndrome. Like you can't believe how easy the test actually is. And I have a feeling that this student, because if we look at what they said, Chris, they said, I'm scoring perfectly on 2 passages, or at least 90% accuracy on 2 passages. So they're doing it right. And when you do it right, then the test starts to seem easier and easier. And you've just got to accept, oh, that's because it actually is easy. There are usually 4 shitty answers and 1 answer that, if we understand it, is perfect. And so I don't read every word of every wrong answer, let alone read it twice, which is what Anonymous is doing. I'm reading it once, and I'm not even reading it all the way through. I'm just looking at it and going, nah, probably not. Right? My default is, nah, probably not. And when it starts going off the rail, starts talking about something that seems wrong, nah, goodbye. And I just get rid of it. It's gone. Now, every once in a while, I will eliminate all 5 answers. Like, I won't like any of them on a first pass through. And if I eliminate all 5 on a first pass through, then I have no problem going, all right, well, I missed something there. Let me be a little bit less critical. Let me give these answers a little more rope. And I'll read them a little more carefully. But I still think that 80% of those answers are wrong. So I'm still going to be pretty damn critical. If I know it's wrong, it's gone, it's out, and it doesn't take me very long, even on a second pass through. It's just not going to take me very long to dismiss most of the answers. Sometimes I get myself into a position where I'm like, well, I know it's got to be one of these 2. Let me really compare these answers to one another. But that's not my default mode. My default mode is there's going to be 1 that's going to jump out at me as correct. There's going to be 4 that are all just going to stink. And I'm going to be very quickly dismissing things that just stink. And yeah, I think it is just a confidence thing, which, maybe this student is just going to take more time to build that confidence up, to really realize how easy the test actually is. But this is where transformative improvement comes from, right? Because I don't think it's going to be that difficult for this student to overcome that, where they're so used to getting 100% or at least 90% of the questions that they attempt in reading comp. Well, going from 2 passages to 3 passages for this student, it's totally within reach. You just have to stop doing this thing that you're doing, which is opening all the answer choices again. I can't tell you, I don't really have a tip for that. It's like, but if 1 of the answers look good and 4 of the answers look like shit, well, that's probably the answer. Like you've probably already answered it correctly. And if you already have the answer, probably, well, then I think you're safe to say, let's go do another one. I don't know. What does all this make you think, Chris?
I'd add to this student, I'm super happy that they're going slow, they're spending time.
Yes.
But I think, knowing that you're going slow, I'd still want to ask anonymous Discord user how that time is allotted. Is the bulk of it in the passage, creating that understanding that we need, really becoming the master of it? Or are we kind of spent bouncing back and forth between answer choices and the passage over and over and over again? And I see a lot of times students in RC kind of attempt them like students who go into logic games without making worlds. They're kind of entering the question, they're trying to build all the scenarios on the fly, and they're trying to answer each one individually. And so what I would tell you is, at least for me, I spend as much time as necessary to create that understanding. I tell my students, read as slowly as you need to understand. Slow is necessary, but not sufficient. I could spend a week reading a passage, not doing the right stuff, and I still wouldn't get any of the questions right. And so how do we know when we understand? When you can do the things Nathan's talking about, you can put all the concepts from the passage in your own words. You can understand why the author wrote it. And that will allow you to make predictions in these questions that just make the wrong answers look so unpalatable. Like you wouldn't be able to swallow those wrong answers because they are just definitively wrong. And so what I suspect, at least in some of these circumstances, either we didn't make a prediction or the prediction wasn't based in a solid understanding of the passage, making some of these answer choices look better than they really were. Take the time that Nathan's talking about when you get to that question. I should be able to answer it every single time, even wide open ones that are like, which of these statements would the author most likely support? It's a big passage, there could be possibilities. But because I've built that understanding of the author, I could probably voice every single potential option that they're going to put down there, grounded in the author's purpose writing this passage. And so spend all that time up front. Make sure you can do all those things. And when you enter the answer choices, the wrong ones won't look so good.
Oh, the wrong ones will look wrong. Like, what did the author think about XYZ? And you stop, you don't start reading answer choice A. That's the kiss of death. Instead, you think about it. What does the author think about XYZ? Well, what did the author say about XYZ? And I shouldn't probably have to go back to the passage to reread that. If I've read the passage well enough, if I actually comprehended their argument, I'm going to go, oh, XYZ? Oh yeah, the author thought that was a good idea. Maybe that was their main point. Maybe that was a supporting thing for their main point, but the author likes XYZ. Okay, answer choice A says, it is misguided because, well, I'm not reading any more of that answer. Again, it's wrong 80% of the time by default. I said the author liked this thing. Answer choice A starts off saying it's misguided because, okay, that answer is eliminated, conclusively eliminated. There's no way it's going to be correct after that. But it comes from a mastery of the passage, and then I'm going to be very, very quick to dismiss wrong answers. And if I find 4 that I'm dismissing and 1 that I like, I'm going to be very quick to pick the one that I like and then just move right along. I agree with you, Chris, that students need to think about where they're spending their time. If they find themselves referring back to the passage for every question, then I know that they're not spending enough time on the passage in the first place. I probably I probably go back 1/3 of the questions, somewhere between somewhere between a quarter and a half probably is where, but it's not 50%. It's definitely less than 50%, and it's probably closer to 25% than it is to 50%. It's like 1 or 2 per passage where I'll go, I can't remember exactly what they said about that. Let me go back and reread that bit exactly. But most of the questions, I'm going to be predicting, I'm going to be having some idea what I'm looking for. And then it's going to be really rare that there are multiple good answers. It's usually going to be 4 shit answers and one that once I think about it correctly, once I read it correctly, I go, yep, that is answering the question that you just asked me.
Yep. And I would say you're ready to hit the questions when you have that confidence you can predict and answer them carefully. It's very similar to logic games in that if I did what I was supposed to making worlds, I incorporated all the rules, got all the possibilities in there. When I see the world's giving me the answer, I don't ask myself, well, wait, why was the world that way? Do I need to redo it? Do I need to read that rule again? Do I need to go back?
Mm,
I don't, because if I applied the method I was supposed to in creating that understanding, I trust what I've got. And so I
yeah.
want you to trust what you've got in RC doing the same thing.
I love the analogy to logic games, and I would shout out I would shout out Eric's cross training class, the one where he talks about use your strengths. For those of you who have gotten over the hump in games, but you're not yet there on reading comp, I would check out Eric's class on use the how to translate those strengths, because in games we're looking to get buckets of points, right? Not 1 point at a time. It's not like, oh, for this question, let me refer back to the rules. And for this question, let me refer back to the rules again. That's brute force method for games. That's never going to be successful. You need to be solving the system in games. And then once you have solved the system, probably through worlds. I mean, we're building worlds 95% of the time in our solutions to games. If you build those worlds, then you get all the questions. You get them, and you get them like rapid fire in many cases, where it's just like, oh yeah, it took me 6 minutes to do my setup, but then it took me 1 minute to answer all of the questions. That's how it can feel in reading comp as well. Because if you really have developed a systematic understanding of what's going on in the passage, then these questions, essentially, they're going to ask you the same question over and over. What did it say? What was the main point? How did they build their main point? What did the passage say? And it's just, they ask that 6 or 7 times. And so it can feel like you're just flying through the questions if you have, because the wrong answers look like garbage, which they are. You're flying through the answering of the questions without having to refer back to the passage a lot. That's because you have developed, think about that maybe, that reading the passage correctly is kind of similar to building your worlds in the game. You're giving yourself a setup for then going in and just destroying those questions.
Yeah, and we've got a related question up next, actually, we could probably hop right into from Joe.
Sure.
Talking about a student who does RC, we're around that same 90% accuracy mark, but no matter what, no matter how slow Joe goes, we still drop 2 to 3 questions every RC section. You say often, Nathan, that on RC, every answer or every question is a must be true. You want to talk about that here?
Yeah. That I think I saw it distilled down yesterday in our teacher Slack somewhere, or maybe it was an email conversation, and maybe it was from you, Chris. I can't remember who exactly said this, but it was just a really pithy thing for each of the logical reasoning, attack the argument, logic games, build worlds. In reading comp, they're all must be trues. I think that is our core philosophy in reading comp. They're all just must be trues. They're asking you in a lot of complicated ways, right? So things like, which one of the following, it can be inferred from the passage that the author might agree, it can be inferred from the passage that the author is most likely to agree with which one of the following. And you think that there's all, like, what they're inviting you to do there is to speculate and to really infer things and to read between the lines. And that's just not what they're asking you. What they're asking you is, what did it say in the passage? What did the author say about this issue? Okay, so on reading comp, they're all just must be trues. Expect them to be must be trues. Now, 5% of the questions on reading comp are going to turn out to be strengthen or weaken. Fine, cross that bridge when you come to it. The vast majority of questions are about what the author's trying to say, what's their main point, how did they prove their main point, all those reasoning questions and role questions. When the author said XYZ, why did they say XYZ? Well, because they were trying to prove their main point. What's their main point? What did the passage say? And that's essentially all they're ever asking you. Oh, not ever, but 95% of the time, they're asking you, what did it say in the passage? And you're supposed to be picking answers that are just grounded in what you read in the passage. So what's Joe's issue?
Joe is saying no matter how much time Joe spends, even in drilling, we almost always drop a question. So there's no benefit to going any slower. We're at 2 to 3 passages. And what I'd say, Joe, is the tough dose of medicine here is like you're still just not being specific enough in those 2 to 3 questions per section. You're consistently advocating for an answer choice that the passage didn't. And to me, the heart of that is always, of course, the understanding we're talking about, but also prediction. I should know going into the answer choices what the right one has to say. And sometimes there are answer choices that look like they're worded very, very similarly, but they are never saying the same thing. And
No.
one of those we're choosing in these 2 to 3 questions per section that's saying the wrong thing. We can't let up on the gas once we get to the questions. That's where we get paid. And so you are kind of running an entire race, it sounds like, getting right to the finish line and then kind of falling over or cutting our pace. We're not sprinting through the end here.
Yeah, and it feels like I'm glad Joe wrote in, and I appreciate your question, Joe. But it does seem like you're kind of asking slightly the wrong question here. The question that you really should be asking is, why are you dropping these questions? Why can't you get higher than 90% accuracy? Many of your competitors are at 100% accuracy. So they're getting them right, but you're getting them wrong. And you're like, well, so shouldn't I just go faster then? Shouldn't I just do more passages? But I think no, you should fix your weakness, which is why are you missing these questions? So I don't think that in your drilling or in your timed sections, like let's separate what you're doing while you're drilling and while you're in your timed sections from your review, which is you got to dig in there and figure out why you're missing those questions. And I promise you that at least half of your mistakes on reading comp, and this actually applies to the entire test, at least half of your mistakes on the entire test at every level are going to be from simple misreading of things. You're misreading the passage, you're misreading the question, you're misreading those answer choices. You could be misreading the right answer that you're not picking. Maybe you're misreading the wrong answer that you are picking. Frequently, you're misreading at, 2 or more of those things because they are really asking you, what did it say in the passage? And you're picking an answer that is not what it said in the passage. And how do we stop doing that? Not necessarily going slower, but for sure in your review, dig in exactly and figure out what it was that you did wrong, because you've got to stop making that mistake. Like you are diligently trying to do this work. I can tell that you understand that accuracy is really important and you should slow down and you should just try to get them right, but you're not getting them all right. And that's where you've got to put the work in review to really see clearly how that right answer is right and that wrong answer is wrong. And then to think about, oh, okay, well, what did I do wrong there? And how could I potentially avoid that next time I do a real test?
Yeah, Nathan and I are never going to care about the amount of time any Demon student spends on a question. What we're going to care about is the way you spend that time and the method you're applying. And so, Joe, what we can figure out here, and I think what you're experiencing is some of that time you're spending isn't paying off. But that isn't because the amount of time is or isn't helpful or it's too much, too little. It's because what we're doing with that time isn't being specific in these answer choices or isn't creating the understanding on the front end to make the wrong answers look as bad as they really are. And so, like Nathan says, through review, you need to understand why the wrong answers are wrong, right answers right, but also understand what in your method, what in your process, what in the way you spent the time that you did led you to get the wrong outcome here. And
Yeah.
so we always want students to spend as much time as it takes to get 100% accuracy. And if we're not there, look at how we're using that time that we do spend. Or if we need to perfect that method, get even better, make sure we're not leaving anything on the board, maybe spend even more time, Joe, even though it won't feel great at this point. It's going to lead you to create those connections and practice that method you need to actually answer these questions the way you need to.
Yeah, you need to be a little more stern with yourself, I think, Joe, on your review, especially of those questions that you're missing. You need to remember that it wasn't just one mistake. It was at least 2 mistakes to miss that question, because not only did you pick a wrong answer, you also failed to pick the right answer. And those are not the same mistake, not if you're doing it right. I mean, sometimes it's people like, oh, I liked B, so I'm picking that, and I'm not even reading C, D, or E. Okay, well, that's the equivalent of jumping out of the airplane with one parachute and no backup parachute. Like, you better hope that that parachute works because you don't have a backup. But if you're in the habit of also, you should be reading all 5 answers, you should be dismissing wrong answers for reasons, and you should be vouching for every single word of the correct answer you pick. Because again, when you missed a question, let's talk about it. You picked a wrong answer. That answer is wrong for reasons. I mean, it's objectively wrong. It does not answer the question. And it might misstate the passage. It might talk about something that was not even in the passage. It could overstate the passage. Frequently, it'll just be something that's like, well, kind of along the lines of what they said, but then it's a more extreme version of what they said and therefore wrong. There are reasons, concrete reasons for the wrong answers to be wrong. And then at the same time, you failed to pick the right answer, which is correct. It does actually answer the question. So before you pick an answer, you should be vouching for every word of that correct answer. You should see how that answer clearly does answer the question. You should also be confidently eliminating the 4 wrong answers. And some of them you have to dig into more than others in order to really eliminate them. But yeah, I guess I would just challenge Joe, in your drilling at least, you need to start getting some 100% passages, because you're like kind of half-assing it. You're rounding off the corners. You're failing to dot some I's and cross some T's. You're not quite blue booking all of your citations perfectly in your legal brief. And that kind of sloppiness is just not going to be successful in the legal world.
And keep us updated, Joe, on how your study goes. I'd like to know if you can get that to 100%.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Again, you can always be LSAT famous by sharing news and asking questions on our website, thinkinglsat.com. This next one, we have a couple here. Editor Eric says, we recently published LSAT Demon Daily, episode 568, where we advised a student with a 174 to retake. I remember that. Ben and I were both like, hey, you can do better. Your practice record indicates that you can do better. And we said, there's no downside to retaking. Some listeners wanted to push back on that. You want to read this first one from Anonymous?
Yeah. So it says, a well-known law admissions consultant was asked on social media about retaking a 174 LSAT. Their response was, I personally would not, but if Yale or someone else waitlisted me, then I would. The reasoning is a lot of schools may waitlist you if you retake a 174 because they will think they are your safety and not likely to matriculate. Kind of seems like an LR argument right there with a couple holes in it. Nathan, what do you think?
I think it's ridiculous. I can't believe that people are famous. I clicked that link, and it is probably the most famous law school admissions consultant. And it's not the first time I've seen that exact law school admissions consultant give bad advice. I do not think that is a good way of thinking about it, because here's the thing. The person that we were telling to retake had a practice test record, which clearly indicated that they had more than half of their scores, more than half of their trailing 5 or 10 practice test scores were above a 174. So I think what people miss is how good it is to improve, while also missing that a retake, okay, many, many, many schools explicitly tell us we only care about your highest score. That's what US News cares about. That's what goes on our ABA 509. We understand that shit can happen. Your high score is your mark of achievement. These other scores, we literally don't put them in the spreadsheet. And I think that that's actually what's going on at every school, if I understand correctly how they use their index formulae, which, by the way, they publish these index formulas. We've talked about that on previous episodes of the show. Maybe Eric will find a link and drop that in the show notes when we had our discussion of these index formulas. But what they do is they take your LSAT and they multiply it by a constant. they add it to your GPA, which they also multiply by a constant because they're trying to just equate between the GPA and the LSAT. And then they add some other constant sometimes. And anyway, they take your two numbers, your LSAT and your GPA, and they turn you into one number. And they do that so that they can try to rank applicants against each other and think about, hey, we're going to try to admit the best class we can admit. So what do we care about? We care about LSAT and GPA. Well, they don't average the LSATs when they put it into that formula. They take your highest LSAT and put it into that formula. So some schools, many schools explicitly say, yeah, the only thing we care about is your highest LSAT. Other schools say, they say cryptic things like, well, when you apply, we have access to all of your scores. Yeah, okay. I get it that you have access to all of those scores, but what do you really care about? Because again, those same schools, the ones that say those cryptic things, they are probably using your highest LSAT to put it into this index formula to do these calculations. There are so many benefits for schools to think this way. If they themselves only care about your highest score, then that's putting their best foot forward to the American Bar Association and to the world via their 509 reports, because it's only the highest LSAT that shows up on the 509 reports. Lower LSATs, whether it came before your highest one or even if you score lower after you've already scored a higher number, that higher number is still what's going to be used in their index formula. That higher number is still what's going to be used when they report on their ABA 509. Schools are actually stupid if they do anything other than consider just your highest LSAT. It just doesn't make sense. Okay. Like they would be admitting people who have a lower highest LSAT if they were doing anything weird like averaging. And if they admit people who have lower highest LSATs, then that makes their 509 look worse, which makes their US News ranking go down, which then gets them fired. I mean, they like these admissions folk are not trying to have their US News ranking go down. And that's why they have this huge incentive to only care about the highest score. But let's go back to this this 174 who was thinking about retaking. Yes, there is some chance that that student might score lower if they take it again. Well, their highest LSAT is still a 174. They took it again and then got a 172. Okay, scoreboard still really says 174 though in our index formulas and in what we're going to publish to the ABA. Second, there's nothing stopping that student from taking it again. And that's exactly the advice that we would give. If this person had a 174 on their first or second or third attempt, they took it again and scored a 172, we would go, well, what are your last 10 practice test scores? Oh, half of them are still above a 174. Okay, great. You have attempts remaining. Take it again. And if you get even 1 point higher, then you immediately ratchet yourself up. I think a ratchet is a really good metaphor to use here, where taking it again, you ratchet up. But if you don't score higher, there is no ratchet down because it's like a ratchet sort of a system. As far as this advice, I personally would not, but if Yale or someone else waitlisted me, then I would. But if this student had taken it again and scored a 177, then they never would have made their way onto the Yale waitlist in the first place. They would have just gotten admitted. Like, you're just ignoring the upside completely. And because of what downside again? Let me think about this. The reasoning is a lot of schools may waitlist you if you retake a 174 because they will think that they are your safety and not likely to matriculate. The logic of that is like, there's this girl that I've been trying to date. I think she might like me already. I better not work out today because if I work out, then she might think that I'm her safety or something. And like, oh, she might say no to me because I'm getting hotter. What? I don't know. That makes no sense. What do you think, Chris?
I think this doesn't make sense to me. And we've talked about how students or how schools are incentivized to look at you as your top score. they get paid, they get US News World Report rankings. They're also incentivized to get students to apply with scores that are below what they want, and students to apply with scores that are like just getting in the door, because those students pay. All of these schools need students to pay to go. And so, for example, I got a 173. I left an attempt on the board. I only took the LSAT 4 times, and there's so many times I've kicked myself. I was actually rewatching our original podcast when I first came on, Nathan, and cheering my 173, but he's like, "Are you taking it again?" And back then I was like, "Oh God, no." Now that I've been teaching, I'm like, I'm so much better at the LSAT now. I really wish I would have. And I'll tell you, I'm going to WashU. They gave me a great scholarship, super happy. They probably would have preferred me apply as a 171 LSAT or a 172 LSAT or a 170 LSAT, because then maybe I'd still go because I love the school, but I'd be paying a lot more money to go. And so when we look at the motives of the parties involved in this situation, they get paid all ways when students get lower scores. The only time that you can shift that power dynamic is when you show up with a score that they can't say no to.
They also want your application right now. And this law school admissions consultant does not do LSAT prep. This law school admission consultant also has an incentive to get your business right now. I mean, they're never going to tell you to retake the LSAT if they think, oh no, 174, nah, let's get to work on your personal statement. Let's get to work. Like you could use my super expensive services to try to get to craft your perfect personal statement and all your get all your other things in line here. You know, just give me $5,000 so that I can then help you with all of your applications and let's get this process moving. Meanwhile, if that exact same student with probably no more prep, right? Like their practice tests already indicate that they have all these data points that are above a 174. To me, it's tragic that you don't just go sit for the test again because it's a free roll, essentially. It's a gambling term where there's just not a lot to lose. And even if it isn't strictly a free roll, right? Like there might be some downside to retake. I guess it's the what if I score lower? As we've talked about, I think most schools just don't even care. The upside, though, just so dramatically outweighs any downside that might exist. Now, think about what this advice is here. It's like, oh no, because there's some chance that some school might think that you're their safety. Sorry, that they're your safety. And so because of that, they might waitlist you. It's like, yeah, but this student also might turn themselves from a 174 to a 177. At which point, fuck whatever school was about to waitlist you because you're just going to go to some other better school.
Yeah, and at this point, we're playing with like your narrative as a candidate and what somebody might think about you as a result of your score. You can impact that narrative as a candidate. If this is a concern you have that some school might think they're your safety, you wouldn't actually attend. Call the office, see if you can set up an online visit, write another essay talking about why this really is the school for you, what you love about the area, what faculty you like. You have impact in all of these areas too. So the same concern that we're saying, oh man, that could be a drawback. They might think you don't want to go. Make your application individualized to the school. Affect what you
Yeah.
can. Your score is going to open that door. They're absolutely going to love to look at your app. Once they look at your app, think about what you want them to see.
I think that is just bizarre advice coming from that law school admissions consultant. I mean, it's like they're just kind of telling you, no, we want you to move forward with this process right now. And I don't get it. I it seems foolish when, again, you know, we're not advising someone who got a 174, have never scored higher than that on a practice test. No, we're not advising you to retake it. Although if you studied more or if you studied differently, then maybe your practice tests would improve. But I get it that 174 is a damn good score. And yeah, like there's nothing wrong with applying with that. But if you have 175, sixes, sevens, eights, nines, and even 180s, which I think that particular student might have had a 180 or two in their practice test record, If that's all there on the scoreboard, and if you were taking your practice test seriously, timing yourself and all that, then there's so much opportunity there. There's so much upside from taking another shot at it. And the downside, I just think it pales in comparison, if there is even any downside at all, which we know there's not at many schools that explicitly tell us, no, we don't care. All we care about is your highest score.
And talking about downside leads really well into this email from Aiden, and then I'll go ahead and read. So
Great.
hello, Ben and Nathan. I've been with the Demon for a couple months now, and I scored a 170 at my last official LSAT. I'm retaking per your advice, as a 170 is actually toward the lower end of my general range.
Perfect.
I have an
yeah. So just
LSAT.
from just that information, I go, why? Of course, take it again. You're telling me that 170 is on the lower end of your range. So you have plenty of data points above a 170. 170 is a great score at some schools, but it's not a great score at other schools, like the aforementioned Yale. Think about that. Like, you apply with a 170 to Yale, that's like potentially an auto wait list in today's era of high LSAT scores. And so, even if there is a school who would look at, oh my God, like, let's say we're talking about a San Francisco law, whatever. Yeah, any school ranked 50th in the country, 170 is a great score at that school. If they see you retaking a 170, does it slightly increase the risk that they might waitlist you? Maybe. But it dramatically decreases the chance that Yale will waitlist you. And all these other schools will waitlist you. And you're probably going to score higher than 170 anyway. You're telling me it's on the low end of your range, so you're better than 50-50 in my book to improve on that 170. So it's like you've got all this upside, and you're going to worry about what? Some hypothetical waitlist downside? Weird. Anyway, sorry for the interruption. Go ahead and continue.
Talk about upside. Aiden continues saying, I have an LSAT GPA of 4.08 and dreams of going to school at the very top. Here's my question.
No brainer. Yeah.
I believe you two when you say there's no downside to retaking, but could you provide some concrete evidence to back up the claim? In other words, is there actually no downside or just comparably small downside to the potential benefit? I ask because one of the many things I've learned from you is the power of common sense, and it seems to go against common sense, for example, to think that my posted 170 next to 4 lower scores wouldn't be looked on less favorably than a raw, organic, unharvested 170.
Well, okay. And again, I'll interrupt. I agree that if you got a 170 and then you proceeded to score lower 4 times in a row, I can see how that might be looked on less favorably than a raw 170. But that's not going to happen. You're telling me that 170 is nearer the bottom end of your range. You've got all these great practice test scores on record. Why can't you do that again? You've already gotten a 170 officially, which is fine. You've gotten better than that on several practice tests. You're not gonna score lower 4 more times. And if you ever, on any of those 4 attempts, score even 1 point higher, the ratchet kicks in. One thing I wanted to say earlier, but I forgot to mention, is that on law school data, lsd.org, they have those charts where you can see the applicant. It's all self-reported data, so you got to take it with a little grain of salt. But you can see, here was my LSAC GPA, here's what my LSAT, highest LSAT was, and here's whether I got denied, waitlisted, or admitted. And it's not every school, but many, many schools, there's these sharp lines right on a certain LSAT number, and that number is very frequently their median. And so for Aiden, who is dreaming of going to law school at the very top, well, that ratchet effect is what's going to potentially get you into those schools at the very top. By the way, if you do retake it 4 times and score lower every single time, which isn't even going to happen, but if that did happen, I think most schools are going to just still consider you to be a 170, and they might not even think about, they're probably not going to think about it deeper than that, right? Like, I know that there are schools who just explicitly say, like I mentioned earlier, Nah, we only care about your highest score. We only ever look at your highest score. We only report your highest score. That's the one we care about. We only care about your highest score, period. So, like at those schools, we do have concrete evidence that they only care about the highest score. I don't have a list of them handy, but I know that Hastings does that, or at least they did when I applied. And there are many other schools in that same range that are only going to care about the highest score. And if you score 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 points higher, every one of those points gives you a much, much better chance at getting into those schools at the very top.
Yeah, and anybody who wants to play around with this, the most concrete evidence you could get, Aiden, would be on lsd.law. Pull up Wash U's page. So not school at the absolute tippy top, but a very, very quality law school. They have the harshest right angle you will ever see this year at 173, and I think like 395, maybe even 40 on the GPA. And if you click the individual data points on there, you will see people with amounts of tests taken all over the place. Some people took it 4, 5, some people took it 3, some people took it 1. All they wanted was that 173. And once you got over that hill, it seemed like you were in. And if you look below that line, no shot. And so for me, myself as a candidate, I've got scores on my actual LSAT report from 159 all the way to 173. None of my results showed that any of these schools looked at me like I was a 159 actual LSAT score. They all treated me as if I was a 173. Why? Because that's to their benefit. That's what they get paid doing.
Those lines, yeah, on Washington, I'm looking at it right now. Again, that's lsd.law, the page for Washington University. You can just hover over that scatter plot that they've got there of all the applicants. And when you when you get somebody who was admitted, it highlights everybody else who also was admitted. And there's just this right angle. It's like right at 171, 172. And it's also right at, what is it, 3.9, something like that. Although the line is stronger for LSAT than it is for, there's a little more blurriness on GPA, but on LSAT, it's like pretty, like they care what their median is because they know that that's what US News uses to rank. US News ranks schools based on one of the metrics is what's the highest LSAT for each person in your incoming class. And then they look at the median of that. So schools have to be interested if they're trying to play the rankings game, which WashU clearly is because they're not idiots. If you're going to play that game, then you have to look at LSATs that way, which is, a 170. I mean, what was their median, by the way? What is their median last year? Oh, 172.
I think it was 172. Yep. They chose to increase it by 1 through this cycle.
Right. They chose to. That's a good way of thinking about it. They decided that they were like, no, we need to get our median up 1 click so that we can hopefully climb the US News rankings by 1 click. And so this, Aiden with a 170, you're not a good candidate right now for WashU. I'm sorry. Even with the 4.08, you're just not a good candidate for that school because if they admitted you with your 170, you would lower their median. They do not want to lower their median. It is clear. You're vastly more likely. That's what makes that law school admissions consultant's their argument so bad is that you are vastly more likely to get waitlisted for an LSAT that is 1 point below a school's median than you are to get waitlisted because you're already at their median, but you are trying again. Or you're already at their median, but you took it again and scored lower. I mean, okay. Can you continue with Aiden's email?
Yeah. Oh, actually, we finished it. So
we
ended up saying, I understand schools only need to report the highest score. It's not common sense to think they'd consider an applicant with a 170 more favorably than candidate with a 170 and a 168.
Right. Okay. And so I do want to engage with that idea. That's a thoughtful question, and I appreciate that, Aiden. And yeah, well, let's take it even more extreme. Like, what if you got 170 and then 168, 168, 168, 168? Okay, so compare 2 candidates. The candidate who took it once and got a 170 versus the candidate who took it 5 times, got a 170, and then 4 scores below 170, which, by the way, is extraordinarily unlikely to happen if your range is what you say your range is. I just don't think that's going to happen. But Even if it did, right? Comparing those two applicants to each other at Wash U, they're both going to get waitlisted because they're both below the median. At a school where you're above their median, what now? The school is going to waitlist you because why? Because you're still a 170 on their 509. You're still a 170 when you report to ABA. You're still a 170 when you're ranked by US News. What incentive is there to care? Okay, but even if there's not like a sensible incentive for them to care, even if it's just like vibes, right? They look at you and they go, wow, well, we got this one person over here. That's a real 170 because they only took it once and got that's a real 170. This other student, 170 and then a whole bunch of 160 somethings. Well, they're not as good of a 170. Okay, fine. I'll grant you that they might not be quite as good a 170, which is why we don't tell people to retake who don't have practice test scores that are above that. We wouldn't tell you to just speculatively like, oh, all your practice test scores are in the 160s, but you lucked out and got a 170 on your official test. Yeah, we think you should retake. No, we think you should retake if there is upside. But to develop this idea a little more, right? Like what's really gonna happen if Aiden retakes? Well, odds are Aiden's gonna score higher than 170 on his very next attempt. Even if he doesn't, he's gonna have another attempt after that, right? So I guarantee you that 170, 168, 171, now you're a 171. And that's a better applicant than somebody who only took it once and got a 170. But even if you got another 168, 170, 168, 168 again, oh no. But then you retake it again and get a 171 or a 172 or a 173 or a 174, and you just ratchet up to that higher level. I am not saying that there is literally no downside. What I am saying is that the downside is speculative and the upside is pretty certain. And the value of the upside dramatically outweighs the downside. That's what I'm really saying.
And, I'm going to say too, we're already in the realm of kind of speculating about what people might think or what things might communicate. I'm so proud, actually, that if you look at my LSAT score report, it goes from 159 all the way up to 173 over the course of about like a year. Because what that communicates is I work hard and I commit myself to things. And if I've got an opportunity to make something better, I'm going to do it. And if we look at people who are going to be lawyers, you want lawyers who are going to be like a dog with a bone. You're going to gnaw at that thing until you get everything out of it that you want. And so taking it multiple times also communicates those things as well. Those are positive qualities. And so even if you get 170 and 4 168s after, that's also going to communicate to schools that, you know what, we admit Aiden here. Aiden's going to max out every single opportunity that Aiden can to get everything that will make Aiden better, that will push it to the absolute limit. I think that's a good thing.
Well, I might go so far as to say that it's, compare two applicants, one who worked their way up to score X and one who just got score X right out of the box, right? So compare you, Chris, to somebody who took it once and got a 173. To the extent that schools care, and I don't think they do. I still think that most schools just consider you both 173s and they don't give a shit what happened before. But to the extent that they do care, I think that they should prefer you, Chris, to somebody else who only took it once. I only took it once and scored really high. I also had no business being in law school. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I wasn't serious about it. I have the horsepower, but the horsepower is only part of the picture. And I did not have any of the work ethic or stick-to-itiveness or even interest in law that might be demonstrated by repeated attempts. Now, I'm not telling people to purposely put bad scores on their record. I think that you should wait until your practice test scores indicate that you're ready to take the test before you take the test. But then when your practice tests indicate that you can score higher, I just think you're absolutely nuts for not retaking it regardless of what fancy law school admissions consultants say. I think that that's a self-serving argument that's designed to get business in the door right now. Um, I think it's foolish because it's ignoring the upside. It's people who just don't understand the LSAT, right? They don't understand how easy it is to actually improve. And that if your practice test record already indicates that you can do better, well, then there's no reason why your official record should not also reflect that.
Yeah,
Keep
and
taking.
as we talk upside, we have some incredible new students at the Demon coming in with 4.0 GPAs. Aiden, you've got the 4.08. I was telling them that's like half of the golden ticket. And some of these students were framing it as, what LSAT score do I have to get for this 4.0 to carry me over the hump, to let me sneak in the door? And I was like, that would be the same as if Charlie, reaching into that chocolate bar, pulled out half the ticket and was like, this might get me close to the factory. I might be able to like stop at the gate outside and not just put the work in to reach in and grab the other half. If I had a 4.08, you bet I'm taking every single possible attempt to then complete that
Yeah.
package and be a maxed out candidate with GPA and
Yeah.
LSAT.
We've said it before, don't make your excellent undergraduate GPA sad. Aiden, don't make your 4.08 sad by settling for a 170. Yes, you are a great applicant at 170, 4.08, but you could transform yourself into an elite applicant if you make that a 173 or 174 or 175 to go along with that 4.08. And I am very confident that if you take it again and score lower, take it again and score lower, you still should take it again because you've got two more chances to score higher. And yeah, that ratchet is going to kick in your favor. I really appreciate the anonymous question and Aiden's question. I want you to push back on the things that we say. Sometimes we do speak in absolutes when we're, actually in a more relative world. So I'm not saying that there is actually no downside, but what I'm saying is that the upside just vastly overwhelms. There is virtually no downside because the upside is so much more important than whatever speculative downside there might be. Appreciate the follow-ups. Next email's from Ryan. It says, is there a difference between 175 and 180? Hello, Demon team. I've written to the show before, so I want to give an update on my LSAT journey. My diagnostic was 150, and I took the November 22 LSAT and scored a 159. At the time, I knew nothing about admissions, so I regret the attempt. I got to the low 160s, but I was stuck there for months until I found the Demon, got a basic subscription, and went to work. It was hilarious how quickly I got my first 170 after studying with you guys and how much time I wasted beforehand. I'm signed up for August with a recent PT average 173, but a high of 177. My goal score was originally 172, but now I'm aiming for a 175 to get at or above all medians. That's get above the median for every law school. I guess Yale must be 175 these days. I'm knuckling down, says Ryan, to consistently be perfect on logic games, which is my worst section. Oh, wow. If I take it and get a 174, would it be worth retaking even if I'm over most medians? Does a school with a 172 median view a 173 differently than a 175 or a 180? Is it all the same since it's above the median? You guys rock. All right. What do you think? What do you want to say to Ryan?
Yeah, well, I want to say, Ryan, if you have PTs that indicate you can go higher, go higher. Take again. We've talked a lot about downside or upside of attempts, and we're consistent here. If you can get more, get greedy. And if you ask about, like, do schools value it more or less? Yeah, they do. And you can tell by the scholarship money they give out. And candidates on sites like LSE.law, they talk about the scholarship money they get.
Yeah. It might not actually be sensible for that school to think that way. They might be a little bit misplaying the game as far as if I were in an admissions office, I might not do that. I might be like, no, if you were 1 point above, actually, if you're at the median that we're going to have this year, I might prefer 1 point above that because there's some chance that we might go up. But if you're at or above what our projected median is, I probably would treat those all the same, but they're not because they use those index formulas, right? They use the index formula. That's your LSAT times a constant plus your GPA times a constant, and they get some number for you. They might want to think about tweaking their formula so that like it's up to a certain point, it helps you. But then once you're at that median, it's just like, yeah, we don't really care about the upside. But you're going to apply broadly, right? And so you have to think about all the other schools where it will matter. But even if a particular school was like, yeah, we don't care if you score higher, you're already at our median. Some other school has a higher median. And so 1 point or 2 points could get you to that magic median number where it's pretty clear that you're just getting waitlisted if you're 1 point below the median at lots of these schools. I want to talk to Ryan here. Ryan says logic games is my worst section, which I went like, ooh, I was like, I was simultaneously a little bit like worried and also excited because Ryan, there's no reason for you to not be perfect on logic games. You're already scoring perfect or close to perfect on logical reasoning and reading comp. That means that you are capable of reading the information on the page. You're capable of reading the question that's being asked. You're capable of reading the answer choices to figure out which ones are right and which ones are wrong. You're a strong enough reader, Ryan, that you can handle the reading comprehension part of the logic games. And if you can do that, then all you have to do is practice the shit out of those games until you just never miss questions anymore. I had to do I did a timed section or maybe 2 timed sections a day for like 6 weeks, maybe 2 months until I finally started scoring perfect sections on the games. Um, we say it all the time in LSAT Demon these days that you really shouldn't sit for your official test, your first official test, until you're already perfect at the games. I think that games is so clearly perfectible that if you have not yet perfected the games, it's like you're just going into court unprepared. You haven't done the work yet if you're not yet perfect on the games. I know that's going to be shocking to people who are starting out and people who are still really struggling with the games. It is the most confusing section for most people when they start, but it is also the section that if you're going to score perfect on any section, that's probably the one. I actually think I'm stronger in logical reasoning than I am in any other section. And I do score perfectly on logical reasoning frequently. But if it was going to be like a gun to my head type of a situation, like I have to score perfectly on a section, I would take games because games is the one where I can just know with certainty that the right answers are right, and the wrong answers are wrong. And there's no reason to not just perfect those games if you keep practicing. We have teachers, by the way, at the Demon who had to do all of the games multiple times before they ever finally got over that hump. And so it could take a lot of work. But man, if you get to that point where you're perfect on games, you are gonna bump up from your current, what are you at? Averaging 173 with a high of 177. If you perfect the games, I think your average is going to immediately be more like 176. And you're going to start to see probably some 180s pop up in your practice test record. So all I'm trying to say, Ryan, is that you're in a fantastic position and I think you should keep going. Okay. Time to do a pearls versus turds. We have an anonymous question here. I'll let you read it.
Sure. So this is from Anonymous. Something that's helped me in my LR is this phrase I repeat to myself. If you don't know exactly why the answer is wrong, it could be right. It helps
Okay,
me.
keep going.
Yeah, it helps me avoid discarding answer choices because they sound wrong or seem irrelevant to the passage. Unless I can explain with precision why an answer is wrong, I don't allow myself to rule it out, no matter how out there it might appear.
Yeah. Okay. So I cannot call that a pearl. Um, in your review. So I think it might be a review. It's a pearl for your review, but it is not a pearl for what you're going to be doing on the actual test, like during timed practice sections, during timed practice tests, during your official test. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. I have an 80% presumption that answers are wrong. And I absolutely do not take all of the time that's going to be required to know exactly why every single answer is wrong. You're giving yourself permission to think that complete nonsense might be right, or complete irrelevancies might be right. Uh, and no, they're just, most answers are wrong. 80% of answers are wrong. And so I don't need to know exactly why they're wrong. What I do need, though, is to know exactly why the right answer is right. So you got to differentiate a little bit. On a first pass through the answers, I'm assuming that they're all wrong unless they convince me otherwise. And if it's meandering off into some weird area that I don't think is answering the question, I just stop reading it and I move on to the next one. And eventually, probably on the first pass through, one of the answers is going to seem like it's right. When that answer seems like it's right, then I'm going to read every single word of that answer carefully enough to feel comfortable vouching for it. Like, yes, Your Honor, this one right here, that answers this question, Your Honor. And I'm happy to pick that. But I don't need to tell the judge exactly why I didn't vouch for all of the 4 wrong answers. Those are just wrong. And they could be wrong for many reasons. They can be wrong for multiple reasons. And they can be wrong just because they don't make sense. So the thing I hate about this tip or this idea, this mantra, is it's flipping the expectation back to like, oh no, every answer has a good chance of being right, and I have to conclusively disprove it. Now, if I don't find something that I think is right on my first pass through, then I might get a little more critical where I'm like, okay, I need to be sure why these answers are right. I'm going to knock out 4 with certainty and try to get there by process of elimination. But normally, I'm not trying to get there through process of elimination. Normally, one of the answers is going to speak to me. It might match my prediction. Even if it doesn't match my prediction, I might be able to see clearly how, oh, yeah, okay, here's what they asked. This one is answering that question. I could feel good about picking that one. But then I don't need to take the time to conclusively eliminate all 4 wrong answers. I am going to be dismissing them because they sound wrong or seem irrelevant, as long as there's one that I'm happy to pick. If there's not one that you're happy to pick, then yeah, one of them does have to be right. And if you don't know exactly why it's wrong, then maybe that's the one. But I'm just not going to go through that kind of a process on my first pass. My first pass is going to be like, every one of these has an 80% chance of being wrong. What do you think?
Yeah, this reminded me and seems very similar to a question we get occasionally on the ask button. Something like, I was stuck on answer choice C, which is wrong. How would you have to rewrite this one to make it correct? And my answer I always want to give is like, well, you'd have to rewrite it like answer choice D is, which was the correct answer. And I think once we get into the realm of like, how do we give these wrong answers as many chances as possible, it's going to lead us into really bad positions on this test. I think often when I read this type of question of like parallel flaw, parallel reasoning, right? If I've understood the argument, I know what I need to see. When I don't see it, I know that's the wrong answer. I don't have to identify what flaw was in the wrong answer and why it's not the same flaw as that one, because my prediction is going to allow me to find the right one. And when it doesn't, like Nathan said, we can get more specific. But I think going as specific, giving all these wrong answer choices as many chances as you can, is going to lead to some bad experiences in these LR questions.
Yeah, you're going to end up spending way too much time on the wrong answer choices. You're going to end up convincing yourself that wrong answers are right. And, it's either right or it's wrong. 80% of them are wrong. I don't see any reason to have this philosophy of if you don't know exactly why it's wrong, then it still could be right. That's not a good default presumption. The default presumption needs to be it's wrong. It's probably wrong. If I don't know exactly why it's wrong, it's still probably wrong, especially if there's another answer that I do see that is right. It sounds like, that strategy there from Anonymous, I think is going to lead to the same kind of problem that we had from the Demon Discord up at the top of the show, where it was like, I frequently open all the answer choices again and eliminate the wrong ones again, even though you've already identified the correct answer. That's the type of thing that's going to happen if you think you need to conclusively eliminate every wrong answer. You should be able to if you need to. And in your review, if you missed a question, then maybe that's what you need to do, is go through and make sure that you can conclusively eliminate all 4 wrong answers. But most of the time, we should have an answer that seems good and the other 4 answers seem bad. And yeah, we don't need to explicitly articulate. You don't get extra points for conclusively eliminating wrong answers. Go ahead, Chris.
And Anonymous, I'd say in logic games, for example, I'm sure when you get to an answer set, you find the one that matches your world. I don't go through each other answer and say, well, why is it that X can't be on Thursday, and go back to the rules and then go back to my worlds, figure out why it couldn't be there. Because I trust the process, I trust the understanding I created, and I trust my prediction. And so when we see the answer choice that matches it, great. I can just say the other ones are wrong. They're not that.
Yeah. Okay. I'm voting turd on that one. Do you agree?
I would. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I don't think that's, and don't feel bad, Anonymous. The current pearls versus turd scoreboard is there have been 25 pearls, 74 turds, and 26 ties. So we're only looking at like 20% good tips that come into the show. Yeah. If you have a pearl versus turd candidate, you can let us know at thinkinglsat.com, or you can find us on social at thinkinglsat. I'm going to wrap it up there. You can be LSAT famous. Just ask us questions or share news with us at thinkinglsat.com. If you have questions about the LSAT Demon, you can email help@lsatdemon.com. Please check out our other podcast, LSAT Demon Daily. Thanks, Chris Murphy, for coming on the show. Anything else you want to say, Chris?
Make sure you bookmark the pretest pump up August 9. Love to see as many of you there as possible.
Free class with Chris. Everybody should be there. Sign up. That was episode 413 of the Thinking LSAT podcast. Thanks all y'all for listening. Nice knowing you. Don't pay for law school.